Welcome everyone to this learning engagement. We're from the Learning Management Group of the ICF Mumbai Charter Chapter. Let me do a very quick introductions of the hosting team for today's session. My name is Tushima and I'm your host for today. And with me in the hosting team are Anuradha Sant and Nimesh Rathod. We're all coaches. We are members of the ICF Mumbai Charter Chapter and we volunteer our services for the learning management team. Yeah, so it's great to have all of you in the session with us today. So with that, let me introduce our speaker for the day. Dr. Colleen Lightbody is our speaker for today, and she will be talking to us on the topic, Coaching in the Muddy Swamp, Channeling Your Inner Warrior to Conquer Adversity. So we know that this topic and the title has led to a lot of interest. But before I turn the session over to her, let me take a few minutes to introduce Colleen. Dr. Colleen Lightbody is the owner of Brainwise, Mastery Through Neuroscience. She is a very well-respected coach, trainer, and speaker internationally, and is generally known as a neuroscience guru. Her global experience includes clients in the Asia Pacific region, the US, Europe, as well as through Africa. Neuroscience is her principal area of expertise. And along with that, mindfulness, brain-based learning, personal and professional coaching, and emotional intelligence. So through her writings, blogs, magazines, as well as television and radio interviews, Colleen has really become known as the Brain Guru. Now, in addition to a private and global coaching practice, she also has over 15,000 hours of training and coaching experience working with personal, professional, and corporate clients. She has a master's degree in leadership from the University of Johannesburg, as well as postgraduate diploma in neuroleadership from Middlesex University, and a PhD in mindfulness and learning. Colleen has a very positive and energetic style, which is reflected in the passion that she has for her career, for people, and her entire life revolves around her core purpose of being a catalyst for change. From climbing Kilimanjaro and Everest Base Camp to achieving provincial colors in both cycling and triathlon, completing 3 Ironman challenges and many long distance cycling races and ultra marathons, Colleen really walks the walk of personal mastery. She has achieved respect and credibility in her career and personal life, and she's really in demand as an accomplished and inspirational motivational speaker. At the TEDx event at which she spoke, she received a very long standing ovation. And if all this was not enough, um, more fun facts about Colleen. After trying out yoga for the first time at the age of 54 while in lockdown, she has completed more than 200 yoga sessions in 1 year. And she's currently on day 81 of a personal challenge to do yoga every day for 365 days, including on a weekend where she completed a 600-kilometer bicycle ride in 24 hours. And currently, where she's doing yoga pretty much one-handed. So on that very awe-inspiring note, Colleen, welcome. And I hand the session over to you.
Thank you very much, Tushima. I usually say I wish my mother was here to listen to my introductions, but today with the last comment, I'm glad my mother's not here to do the introductions because she thinks I'm a little bit mad. So thank you very much. And yes, today I'm here to talk to you about coaching in the muddy swamp and how to channel your inner warrior to conquer adversity and how to use that in your coaching experiences. So I've used the metaphor of the lotus and the swamp here as a metaphor for what I see my clients going through and certainly what I've lived my life going through. So it is a universal metaphor where the beautiful flower, which is the most beautiful flower in my opinion, which is the lotus, only grows in dirty, muddy water. And it's symbolic, completely symbolic of the emergence of wisdom, of growth in Buddhist philosophy of enlightenment and how that emerges through suffering. through difficult life experiences. So this is a universal metaphor about how we may take our trials and tribulations and turn them into something that makes a difference in the world. So for today's talk, I've kind of divided into sort of 3 sections. What happened when I initially spoke to Anuradha and Tashima around doing a talk for Mumbai ICF, they invited me to talk, and we had a discussion about some of the topics that I could talk on. And the more I tried to suggest interesting subjects like intuition and motivation and these kind of wonderful things, which I love to talk about, the more they insisted that I actually tell my personal story. And every time they asked me to tell my personal story, I'd say, no, let me rather talk about this science subject or that coaching subject. And eventually, Tashima, I can't remember if it was you or Anuradha who made the comments, Colleen, Indians love a good story. And that was kind of the thing that convinced me finally to share my story. But this is going to be about my story, kind of where my story started in terms of my muddy swamp and the difficulties I began to experience, how in the middle of my life I discovered coaching in another kind of muddy swamp. And I'm also going to talk about the lessons that I learned through the difficult experiences that I had and how relevant that is to coaching. So I don't just want this to be about me. I want you to come on a journey with me. And I want you to do some self-reflection about your life experiences. What are the kind of muddy swamps that you've inhabited in your life? And what are the kind of experiences that you've had or your clients have had that we need to learn from and grow from? And how can we do that? And I'm going to share some coaching techniques that I use to support my clients through their muddy swamps. So this is not about me being a paragon of perfection. As you can see, I've got a broken collarbone at the moment, which is quite a funny part of the story, actually. So it's certainly not me being infallible. It's definitely about my vulnerability and frequent difficult learnings. Can I put it that way? So just to start at the beginning of my muddy story, and I'm not going to really start at the beginning, because at the beginning, I had quite a normal life. I grew up with a brother. My brother's name was Martin. Grew up in Johannesburg in South Africa. We really had a ordinary, somewhat privileged childhood. Went to a private girls' school where I had no self-confidence. I had and I didn't do particularly well academically or in any other area. This is a picture of me and my best friend trying on the prefect's blazers, because we certainly weren't prefects. We didn't have all those badges. I kind of muddled through school. And I think my muddy swamp kind of began, it was one winter's day in July when I was at boarding school and I was sitting pretending to do homework, as I often did. And I suddenly looked up and I saw my mom walking down the passage. And it was the most peculiar thing, because what would my mother be doing at school when I'm supposed to be studying for exams? And it was kind of this, I couldn't make sense of it. And the closer my mother came towards me, you know, that feeling that you get in your heart when something is wrong and kind of time slows down and the world becomes a little surreal. And as my mother walked towards me, I started to get the sense that something was wrong. And my mom came and she said to me, Colleen, your brother is missing. So at that time, my brother and my father had been traveling in Botswana in Africa on a safari, and they were in the Okavango, in the Okavango swamps, you know, having a wildlife safari. And what had happened is in the middle of the night, my brother had walked out of the camp that they were in into the bushveld. Now, at that time, I was 17 years old at the time. My brother was 20 years old. At that time, Botswana was experiencing a really severe drought, and most of the rivers had dried up, and the place was teeming with wildlife. Lion, hyenas, jackal, leopards. It was a really, really dangerous place to be. Anyway, that was a story that took 5 days, obviously 5 very traumatic days with friends of the family, flying up to Botswana to help in the search. They called in the Botswana paramilitary to fly grids over the area to search for my brother. So he was missing for 5 days and for 5 nights in the middle of this drought in the African bushveld. Eventually he was found, and the person who actually found my brother was actually the owner of the safari camp in which they were staying in. And about 3 years ago, I started to tell my brother's story. And I actually got the opportunity to speak to Lloyd Wilmot was the gentleman's name, who told the story of my brother's, when he actually, well, he told the whole story of my brother's going missing, and he wrote a book about it. And I spoke to him on the phone, and he actually read part of the book out for me. So I've just got a little clip of Lloyd reading a little part of the story of when he found my brother in the bushveld in the Savuti. So I'm just going to share with you, these are the words, because you might find it difficult to hear his accent, but just a short clip of Lloyd telling the story of how he found my brother.
Somehow he had avoided elephant breeding herds, hyenas, buffalo, and lions for 4 nights, to be found late on the 5th day. He'd eaten no food nor drunk any water. At night he had climbed trees or fallen asleep on the ground. He had no jacket to ward off the bitter Sandfeld cold, and had lost his shoes. Without water and medication, he was losing his ability to think rationally till he was completely disorientated.
So I just wanted to share a small part of the story because it was incredibly traumatic and it affected many people. And I think it was quite a primary time in my life because it was that time of starting to finish school, really establishing my identity and going out into the world. And up until this point, I'd kind of been really irresponsible. My brother was the sensible one. He was the good brother. I was kind of the naughty one, always getting into trouble. But now suddenly this catastrophic experience had happened. They flew my brother home from Botswana. And I remember sitting next to him in the back seat when we fetched him from the airport. And he was kind of very quiet and a little strange. And I didn't really know, but in a way kind of lost my brother then. He had always been responsible and sensible and together, and kind of lost a little bit of him through that experience. And about 3 months later, my brother was actually diagnosed with bipolar affective disorder. So I don't know if any of you've experienced that or heard of it, but it's really a disorder where people experience mania and severe depression. And he was type 1 bipolar. Now, this was my brother who had been the most sensible, intelligent, respectable person. And suddenly he had these incredible mood swings that were really destructive. At times, he would do crazy things, you know, hitchhike in the middle of the night, which, believe me, in Johannesburg is not the safest thing to do. He would try to get on airplanes to travel overseas with no ticket. And then at other times, he was back to his normal, sensible, intelligent self. So he was the victim of this terrible, terrible mental disease, which really, or mental illness, which really affected him for about the next 11 years. And, well, 10 years, actually. So about 10 years later, just before Martin turned 30, he went missing again. And again, he was missing for a few days. But when we eventually found him, we found his body, and my brother had died. He'd actually committed suicide. So this was kind of the beginning of my, this is my brother. I've got a picture of my brother. This was kind of the beginning of my change in my life and the muddy swamp that I started to inhabit, having lived quite a perfectly ordinary and straightforward life until this point. And I think the lessons that I had in these beginning 10 years of my sort of adult life were, I had to do something about the life that was throwing up these unimaginable and chaotic challenges at me. I'd been this irresponsible, having fun, playing tennis, you know, sliding up and down the dormitories and letting off stink bombs in the classroom. And suddenly life changed. And my brother, I had to become responsible. And as a result of all these things, I think in an attempt to try and help myself make sense of these experiences that we were going through, first of all, I joined a crisis intervention center where I learned to do crisis counseling, We used to go to the inner city in the middle of Johannesburg and through the night sit and counsel people that came in off the streets with traumatic experiences. I then also, with my brother, while he was alive, he and I started an organization called the Bipolar Support Group, where we supported other people who suffered from bipolar. We also we became part of the anxiety and depression support group. And I also, after a couple of years of dropping out of university, I eventually landed up doing self-study, not virtual, because in those days we didn't have virtual. I studied my psychology degree to learn about psychology. Oh, and also at the time, what happened was my mom and dad had been visiting friends and they'd been attacked at their friends. And it was a terrible situation. They'd been sitting having dinner with 5 of their friends, and 3 guys walked in with guns, made them all lie down, held guns to their heads, took off all their jewelry. By the way, I live in Johannesburg. It's a pretty dangerous city. They took off all their rigs and their jewelry, and as they walked out the door, they shot my mother's friend in the head. He did survive the experience, but you can imagine how traumatic it was for them. They eventually airlifted him to hospital, but incredibly traumatic for my mom and dad. And the very next day after that event, you know, you feel so helpless when these things are happening to your family. And then the very next day, I think I had quite a transformational experience, is that I actually went to the local police station and I signed up to learn how to become a trauma counselor. And ever since then, in Johannesburg and in fact around the world, I've become very involved in working with trauma and grief ever since then. So starting to take some steps and starting to do some things to try and make sense of the difficult experiences. Please don't think my life was just about trauma and difficult experiences, although I think I've got a few stories. But the important thing was that I went out and I took action to try and find a way to support the people that I loved that were going through trauma. But in actual fact, I think what I was doing for myself was trying to find something that could make sense, because I was so bewildered from these events that had happened. So the lesson that I've learned, and this is something that I use in all my coaching, I've called it the coaching lesson, or the lotus, the beauty that has come out of it. And this is one of obviously many beautiful lessons that have come out of it. And this one is about life. So I always say when I talk, some of you seen me talk, seen me doing presentations and teaching, coaching, etc. I always say life is like this graph. Sometimes we have wonderful experiences. Sometimes we have terrible experiences. Sometimes we have wonderful and exciting, magnificent things happening to us. Sometimes we have traumatic things happening to us. Our life is like this. I definitely feel like mine is like this, and I'm sure most of you have experienced life is like this to a greater or a lesser extent. And the question I always ask is, where have you had your greatest learning experiences? Where have you had your greatest learning experiences? So answer me on the chat. I'd love to see what everyone, I need to try and engage with you now and get some conversations going. Where have you had some of your greatest learning experiences on this graph? Exactly, Pramod, at the bottom. Okay, that is where we learn. That is where we grow. And I think part of our journey at the pit points, absolutely, Vidya, part of our journey in terms of our own personal life is we're going to experience this, whether you like it or not. Life doesn't, we've kind of set this expectation that we should be above that middle line. I call that sort of, that's those 2 lines in the middle, I call it the Prozac zone, because it's kind of where we need to be blunted. And I'm not saying Prozac is bad, but where we need to be blunted from life experiences. Or we say that we need to live at the top, above that line. But in actual fact, life is not like that. And even in coaching, a lot of people say coaching is all about the future. It's all about outcome. It's all about where we're going. But in actual fact, you've got a human being sitting in front of you, and that human being is going to have had a life like this. You yourselves have had lives like this, particularly at the moment. You know, we are going through, and I see Shubri is saying there, you know, also emerging from loss. At the moment, we are going through a really catalytic, traumatic, and really transformational time, which is not easy. Okay. And one of my worst things that when people say, and I definitely as coaches don't want us to say this, one of my worst things is when people say, don't worry, it's okay, don't be upset, don't be angry, don't take it personally. People tell us how not to feel, or that we should avoid these difficult experiences. But that's insane, because these experiences are there whether we like it or not. They're going to come our way. You are going to have people sitting in front of you that feel depleted, that have suffered loss, that have suffered illness, and perhaps are still suffering. So it's our job as coaches to not invalidate other people's life experiences. Yes, we help people move forward. Yes, we help people set goals and move towards outcomes. But as coaches, we need to acknowledge the difficulty and the hurt and the pain that people are experiencing. It is not bad to be sad. It is not bad to be angry. That is part of the human experience. As in coaching, it's what we do with that anger. It's what we do with that pain. And just remember that if a person is suffering from grief or suffering from trauma, it might not be the time for coaching. You may have to refer them to a therapist or a grief counselor or trauma counselor while they're experiencing that. You yourself, while you're experiencing the pain, be with the pain. It's okay. That's part of the process. We have to learn to be with it. But we've created these worlds where we say, don't just search for happiness, search for meaning. And we forget about the fact that there is meaning in the difficult experiences as well. So my graph there is about not invalidating our clients' experiences, to be able to sit quietly and wisely with our clients if they are suffering pain, and to help them learn and grow from that pain, okay, not to invalidate it. But even more important, I had to learn to sit with my own experiences in many ways. And I'll come to we're still talking about the beginning, I'll come to the middle, but in many ways, what I was doing by trauma counseling, grief counseling, crisis counseling, doing degrees, I was actually trying to avoid my own pain. I wasn't learning to be able to sit with it and embrace with it. I was kind of avoiding it and fighting it. And I'm not saying that that's bad, but some of the greater learning came later. Absolutely. Thank you, Shubhra. It is a roller coaster ride. Exactly. And that is what life is like for us. So there's lots of lessons in this, but I want you all to reflect. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick breakaway, a breakaway for about 15 minutes. We're going to put you in groups of around about 4, because this is an opportunity. I'm going to share more stories with you. We're going to share more coaching lessons with you. But the important thing is that we reflect on, what does this mean for me? So we're going to get into the muddy swamp now, okay? You can dip your toe in if you like. You don't have to jump straight in with both feet. Because as Thich Nhat Hanh says, no mud, no lotus. But first we've got to uncover the mud. So what I'd like you to do is, in this small breakaway that you're going to be in with a few other people, and if you don't want to share, you don't have to. You can share one of your clients' experiences. Obviously, keep confidentiality. You can share one of your family's experiences or one of your own experiences. What has been a muddy swamp experience that you can grow and learn from? Okay. Namesh, are you going to put us into the breakaways?
Yes, we're ready. Shortly, you're going to receive an invite. Please take the invite. And in case you find that there is nobody else in your breakout room, don't panic. We'll rescue you out of it. Here goes the invitation.
Okay, everyone's back. There's a very nice comment from Divya in the chat box, Colleen. This was a brilliant question to discuss. And thank you so much for this opportunity to share and connect. So should we have a couple of people tell us how it went and if they want to share anything?
Thanks. And I'm just, if I'm sort of in good coaching style, Tashima, I'm just going to remind people, don't share somebody else's story because of confidentiality, but just share what was one of your insights, or what would you like to share with the group. So who would like to just put up your hand? I can see Bhaskar. Would you like to share?
Yeah, just I'll take 60 seconds. One thing that emerged in our group is we are all in the same storm, but we are all in our own ships or boats.
And you're reflecting on in terms of what we're going through globally with COVID,
Yes.
the pandemic. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And I mean, there's different, some of these tornadoes and there's cyclones and there's typhoons and there's all kinds of different storms and all kinds of different ships. But I love that metaphor. And I can even now picture my ships floating in my muddy swamp. Thanks, Pascal. I love that. Good. Anyone else like to share?
Yeah, may I?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. In my group, all the four stories we shared had to do with relationships. My story particularly was about relationship and complicated with the COVID outcomes. But relationship was the underlying theme everywhere.
So may I comment on that? Tashina, sorry, who was speaking? I'm not sure who that was. I didn't see.
I'm Ajit.
Ajit. So down at the bottom there, you go. Sorry, on my screen, down at the bottom. So Ajit, you know, the amazing thing about, and I'm just going to bring in a little bit of science every now and again, and I'll also talk a bit about emotions in science, is that our brains are completely wired to be social. As human beings, the human creature has the greatest need for social connection of any other. It stays vulnerable for the longest time and needs caring from. So our brains are actually wired as in such a primal way that our need for social connection is as primal and critical to us as the food we eat and the water that we drink. And that is why the most of our waking thoughts are about other people. Okay, that is why I heard a lovely saying the other day, and please forgive me, I forget who said it. But the best, I did a talk on trauma for one of the ICF groups. The best thing for a person in trauma is another person. The worst thing for a person in trauma is another person. We've got to be the right kind of people as coaches. So thanks. I love that you commented on that, because most of our traumatic experiences and most of our pain comes from others, and most of our joy comes from relationships as well. Preeti, you wanted to comment as well?
Yes, so Colleen, we actually, the moment when we were brought into this room and we were still in conversation, we were reflecting on this question, not really sure what the answer is, that when you are in this muddy swamp, and I don't think any of us have been, kept away from that, especially in these times. So whether it was about isolation or, a sense of betrayal, any of these deep, kind of wound, do you pick yourself up consciously out of the swamp, or do you allow yourself to stay there, do not rush it, and trust that when it is time, the bloom will happen? And the mind can play havoc sometimes, because of what we see around. If I may also say, with a lot of positive psychology stuff being out there in different forms, it leaves you feeling a bit confused. And that's something I thought was interesting in our conversation that I wanted to share.
Yeah, and I think that is such a valuable question, especially for all of us as coaches, Preeti. So first of all, the fact of the matter is that we have not been taught, and I say we because you'll see how in the next little section, I think either I'm half Indian or I was definitely Indian in a previous life, but it doesn't matter what culture we come from, okay? It doesn't matter where I teach this in the world. Somehow we've created a world of conditioning that says we mustn't be sad. We mustn't feel negative experience. And we haven't taught people how to sit present with other people's grief, how to sit present, never mind our own grief, but how to sit present with other people's. And as a coach, it is not our job to coach everybody out of their pain. When a person is ready and willing, and that can be navigated between you and that person, you can sense, is it time to move, or is it still too hard and too difficult? And then to allow people to sit present with their pain and not have to escape it. It is not, and I'll teach you some things right at the end of the session about how we can be mindfully present with pain where it doesn't shatter us. It might immobilize us for a while. You use the word wound. We might feel, but what do you do when you're wounded? Look at me. This is what you do. You put your arm in a sling. What do we do when we're hurting and we're in pain in normal life? We flap our arm around and we try to carry and pick up heavy furniture, when in actual fact we need to be in a sling for a little while. So I'm not doing example on trauma and grief, particularly here, but what I'm saying to us as coaches is the muddy swamp is the muddy swamp. We can't magic it away with fancy words, motivational speeches, or trying to avoid it. Okay, but neither do we want to wallow in it forever. But it is part of our life. It's about how do we navigate it successfully. Thank you, Preeti. Okay, so let me go. I'm only a third of the way through.
There was a request from Divya. Colleen, she wanted to add to what Preeti said.
Yes, I'll make that quick. And I know Colleen needs to get it. But Preeti's dimension was very interesting when she mentioned about, what is it that's really emerging in that moment. And I don't think anyone might have probably noticed this, but the lotus flower has this ability to, it sows the seed and blooms at the same time. It's the only flower that can do that. And I think one thing that really stood out from the conversations that we had of folks who had been going through the muddy swamp is, what are the causes that you had been made while we were going through those swampy moments? And those causes have bloomed into something absolutely transformational, which is so core to what they have emerged and become today. So which is so tying in with what this lotus flower stands for, because it's the only flower that sows and blooms at the same time. So it's a very, very transformational thing, that what are you learning and what are you making as causes in that moment, in the swampy times, that's going to pay off immediately or even in the long run. So that's pretty much from my side. Over to you, Colleen.
No, absolutely. Divya, wait, hold on a sec. I promise you I'm not going to leave you in the muddy swamp, okay? So thank you because you actually, you're bringing out the metaphor, a depth to the metaphor, which is beautiful. And I also saw you put, I think it was you that put on earlier about the Lotus Sutra from the Buddhist practice. I mean, we could have spent the whole session just talking about the metaphor, but thank you. That is so important to know that within that depth of despair is the seed of enlightenment, or the seed of knowledge or wisdom, whatever it is that we're going to navigate to. Okay, thanks, Divya. Okay, so that was the beginning. Okay, we're in the muddy swamp, but the muddy swamp hasn't left us yet. Let me just see. Okay, the middle muddy story. Okay, so what happens? My brother passes away, and we are grieving. And I'm now newly married and discover that I'm unable to have children. I go through this hideous, I don't know what the word is, hideous infertility treatments, a few months and years of fertility treatment, trying to fall pregnant, which if anyone's ever been through it, firstly of all, it's the grief of the loss of the ability to bear a child. It's the social kind of stigma that's attached to it. It's the, making decisions about what do we do. And I think partly my brother dying, I decided that I needed to have children. I needed to have a family. And so my husband and I started the process of adoption. And it was the most amazing thing. On the anniversary of my brother's first birthday, from when he, after he died, I got a phone call from the social worker to say, Colleen, you and your husband have been chosen as parents to this child. So we did what they call an open adoption, where the biological mother looks at all the albums that you put together about your lives and who you are. There's no sharing of names or anything like that, but they choose you as the parents. And basically we were chosen to be parents, and I adopted my daughter, Abigail. So still in grief, still in pain. I was as skinny as a rake, and along came this beautiful daughter who didn't stop screaming for the first 8 months of her life. I think I was so traumatized. She was so traumatized. We kind of traumatized ourselves together. She had terrible colic, but Abigail has been the most beautiful and inspirational part of my life, or one of the most beautiful and inspirational parts. This is a picture here of Abby and I a couple of years ago when we went to meet her biological parents for the same time, which was a muddy swamp for me. You have to understand, to suddenly there's this biological family there. What is going to happen? And this was me and Abigail on the beach just before we met her biological family. Abby got married at the end of last year, so she's living beautifully and happily. And we waited a while and decided we wanted another child. So we tried and tried. It's very difficult to adopt in South Africa, but eventually we were chosen to be parents to another child. And so 5 years after Abigail was born, my son was born, Gabriel. And when Gabriel was born, when I was actually present at both of my children's births. And when Gabriel was born, the doctor took this baby and put it, takes, and you know how they check the baby and everything. And he said, turned around and said to me, your son has got, they call it clicky hips. So basically he had congenital hip dislocation. So I walk out of the delivery room to go and tell my husband that we've got a son, and to tell the social worker. And the social worker said, but Colleen, you said you weren't going to take a child with a disability after what you've been through with your brother because of your daughter. You don't want to put that burden on her like you had that burden with your brother. And I said to her, oh, for goodness sake, it's a physical disability. Anyway, so Gabriel, this is my little boy. They put him in something, they call it a Pavlik harness, which is like a little harness that holds the hips up in place. So they try and get those hips to kind of fit in again. It's the socket for the hip is flat. So they're trying to get the socket to curve in. And for 6 months, Gabriel was in this Pavlik harness. We couldn't take him out of it. Had to wash him in it and everything. It was pretty hectic, but it didn't work. I was fine because I said to the social worker, it's a physical disability. I can handle that, no problem. I've got trauma counseling, grief counseling, crisis. I can do this. So 6 months, Gabriel's in the Pavlik harness, and we go to see the doctor, final x-rays, and the doctor says, I'm afraid it hasn't worked. And what happened from then, we went through another 2 years of treatment. Basically, Gabriel, that's Abigail carrying Gabriel. Let me just close my chat so I can see my picture. That's Abby. He was in this full body plaster cast for almost 2 years. From his shoulders down to his little toes, this terrible body plaster cast. That's Abigail carrying her brother. And he would go every couple of months, have under anesthetic, have the plaster cast taken off, have these x-rays, be manipulated. He had quite a few surgeries in those years, about 9 or 10 different surgeries. I don't even really remember the 2 years. I think Abigail had to raise herself to some extent. So you had all these surgeries, and eventually his little hips kind of sorted themselves out. So we're happy, and Abigail and Gabriel are growing up, and it's now, Gabriel's now 5 years old, ready to go to school, and his school teacher says to me, his play school teacher says to me, Colleen, I don't know why, but I'm a little bit worried about Gabriel. And I'm thinking, gee, I don't know what she's worried about. This, he's so funny. He didn't talk for 2 years while he was in the plaster cast. Then he comes out the plaster cast and he doesn't stop talking. He's the most articulate child you can believe. I think this child is going to be a lawyer or a doctor. He's funny. His development was slow, but he'd had 2 years in a plaster cast. Anyway, we go off, to cut a long story short, we go off, have Gabriel tested. And on the in August 2009, 2005, I sit in front of a panel of specialists who tell me that my son is permanently and irrevocably brain damaged, that he has a mental disability, he has brain damage. So if any of you have seen my TED talk, it was largely around Gabriel and speaking about the fact that we discovered he had they call it fetal alcohol syndrome. So his biological mother drank in her pregnancy, which crosses the blood-brain barrier, affected the child. Basically, the baby's brain shrinks. And Gabriel, he's now 21. He turned 21 in January, but he will never even reach the cognitive age of a 10-year-old. He hasn't even got 5th grade. this kind of was the biggest transformation and the biggest shift for me. Up until this point, I'd been, you know, when Abby was born, I started studying my clinical psychology honors. I started, you know, sort of paying a little bit more attention to my life, still doing all the trauma work, the grief counseling and that kind of thing. But now kind of my life shifted. It was, I can almost say to that day when I stood in front of those professors and got that diagnosis for Gabriel, I realized I had to take charge of my life. I was still drinking and smoking. I still didn't have much confidence. In those days, I'd been a beautician for 20 years. That's what I'd been doing for a living, is I'd been painting nails, and I had a little beauty salon at home. I was not motivated. I didn't work very hard. And this diagnosis kind of shifted my life. I was 40 years old, and I gave up smoking. I started walking because I didn't want to put on weight when I started smoking. The walking turned into running. The running turned into cycling. The cycling turned into triathlons. And so I started to change my life. So I started to embrace adventure. I went and did a coaching. My first coaching training was with the Neuro Leadership Institute. It was called Results Coaching Systems at that time. And I learned about coaching. And on the day that I graduated from my very first coach training program in 2005, the lead trainer turned to me and said to me, "Colleen, it was like you walked into a room that you had always owned, but you didn't know was your own. I'd found my space." And I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned from going from all this counseling work, which I embrace and I still do to this day, but going into coaching, it taught me about empowering people. It taught me about how to not rescue people. I didn't have to be the hero, but I had to help people become the heroes of their own lives. So at the same time, I started to, that's me at the top right doing, I did 3 Ironman competitions. I was doing many ultra marathons. So my physical fitness, I became embedded in it. I made a decision to never say no to anything that scared me ever again, which is not always the most sensible decision. I wouldn't always advise it for anyone. And that's Abigail and I at Base Camp Everest. Lots and lots of adventures, Kilimanjaro. We took on lots of exciting, and I took on lots of exciting challenges. And one of which was when I started to travel. Before this, I'd never traveled. And suddenly I was doing a lot of work for the Neuro Leadership Institute. I found this ability to teach and train. I've never been taught how to, but I suddenly learned how to. And I started traveling to India. I was probably doing around about, with the Neuro Leadership Institute, around about, I'd say 8 trips to India per year. I think in total, in about 5 years, I did something like 350 flights. I was traveling around the world, just gathering knowledge. I started doing my master's degree. I went and did my neuro leadership training at Middlesex University. Again, I think I was still trying to make some sense of everything that had been so difficult. I think the pinnacle of that was when I spoke in 2015 at TEDx Hyderabad. And my story at TEDx Hyderabad was called Moving from a Warrior to a Warrior. So from a warrior with an O to a warrior with an A. And I talk about becoming a warrior of your mind. I was kind of fighting life and out there, and no matter what, I was going to make a success, and I was going to change people's lives and change my own life at that time. You can see I love wearing saris. This is, Mumbai has been the place I've visited most, but I've been to most countries: Hyderabad, Delhi, Pune, Rishikesh. I've been all over India. And I love wearing saris, and often my Indian friends tell me that I look like I was born to wear saris. So lots of hard learned lessons, but wonderful adventures that emerged from them. And I think the coaching lesson that came out of this was about shifting from rescuing into compassion. So many of you may have seen this. I just love this little clip from Brené Brown. So I'm going to just show it to you, and then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my version of compassion.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection, Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Isn't that just wonderful? I think it's the most wonderful talk. So I'm just going to go a little bit further and just talk a little bit about compassion. Then I'm going to ask you something about compassion. So basically, this is my model of compassion. What we have here is people, that's what we were talking about earlier. You know, don't worry about it. It'll be okay. You'll get past it. There's dolphins swimming up the Venice Canal. So this pandemic is all for a purpose. That's one of my worst ones. That's kind of a really passive space to sit. Then we get pity, which, Brené Brown's talking about there. And pity is really about feeling sorry. It's one step above ignoring and invalidating, but it's still pretty low on the virtues of rescuing and passivity, non-virtues, should I say. Then comes sympathy, which is a step above pity, which is I understand your feelings, I care. So the example, and this is a true life example that I like to use, is during lockdown, we had one of the most toughest lockdowns in the world. In fact, many people said it was the toughest lockdown. We couldn't go out at all. And so this was May last year. We've got a pipe outside our house, like a drain pipe for the draining water. And there was a guy living in, we've got a lot of, I think we have 30% unemployment currently, which is only a recorded unemployment. So we had this guy who lived in the pipe outside our house. And the sympathy was going, oh, shame, this poor guy living outside the house. It's really terrible. Okay, that's kind of what sympathy does. Empathy, on the other hand, is I understand and I share the pain that you have. I feel your pain. Now, we always learn in coaching about empathy and how important empathy is. And in actual fact, the neuroscience of empathy is quite important. And it links to what we were saying earlier about the social brain, is that we actually have a part of our brain that actually resonates with the experience of others, and that's what builds relationship. So empathy is really important. I understand and I share your pain. So empathy is where, shame, the poor guy sitting in the tunnel outside my house, and I'll take him a blanket. Okay, so I'll care and I'll do something about it. Often it's because I can't experience the pain myself, so I have to feel like I'm supporting him. Still pretty low, though, in my opinion, on the rescue versus empowerment. So the next step is compassion. And for me, compassion is a whole nother level to empathy. And what compassion is, and I like to use the example of a hospice worker. You get a hospice worker that that do this incredible work. Basically, they are supporting people through the end of life. The end is inevitable. That person is going to die. But that hospice worker, if they merely felt empathy, it would be debilitating. Many of you are hearing about, especially as healthcare professionals, as coaches. I don't know about you, but I'm doing more mental wellness than almost coaching at the moment. And you've heard about compassion, empathy fatigue. And the reason I'm talking about, sorry, somebody's got their sound on. Nimesh, I'm not sure if we can manage that. The reason I'm talking about the hospice care worker, because can you imagine a hospice care worker knows that this person is going to pass on, and yet they still have to care for them. They have to show compassion for them, knowing that the inevitable is in sight. So compassion for me is a whole another powerful step. And it's what we need as coaches to engage with our clients. I need to be able to be present with my clients, to understand their feelings, to have empathy for these feelings, but to understand that it is their journey. If that person is at the bottom of that life experience, in that traumatic experience, it's not my job to rescue them. Because if I'm going to rescue you, I'm basically saying to you, you have not got the wisdom and the strength and the character to navigate through this difficult experience. I'm saying that I'm the great, wise, almighty one that's coming to rescue and take your learning experience away from you. And guess what, guys? Sometimes that person can't learn and grow. Sometimes that person falls straight off the edge of the cliff. And that happened to me with my brother. But it wasn't my journey to rescue him from. It's not my journey to save a client from their pain. It's their pain to go through. And I need to be there to be compassionate, to hold the sacred space for them to experience their pain, knowing and understanding that it's their journey and the way they navigate it is their choice. But I think the message that I also want to share here with you is that we need to have compassion for ourselves. Self-compassion is so important. It's absolutely critical for us to hold the sacred space for our clients, to allow them to go through their journey, to learn and grow and to fail. Okay, that's why we don't assume that the client has to do something like this or shouldn't do that. It's their journey to learn from their experiences and to have compassion and care for them. But it's also important for us to have compassion and care for ourselves as we support others to go through that journey. So we're not going to do a breakaway right now. We're going to have one more breakaway a little later. But what we're going to do right now is do an activity, and this is going to be in the chat. And if anyone wants to come off mute and talk to me, sorry, I'm just going to the chat now, Tashima, if you can help me kind of manage it. What I want to know is what are some ways that you can show yourself self-compassion. We're not used to doing this. You know, we're taught, especially Indian women are taught, you look after everybody else, okay? South African women too, by the way. So what are some ways that you can show yourself? What can we do to help our clients be self-compassionate and help ourselves be self-compassionate? What are some of your ideas? If anyone's very keen to come off and speak, then anyone?
I could go. Colleen, hi, you're doing such a fantastic job. I'm loving this.
Sorry,
so how I show, this is Priya, and the way I show compassion to myself is by finding time to sing. And music for me means so much, but I have always put it away and put everything else in the front burner. But I've recently, in the past, in fact, during this pandemic, made it upon myself to make time for music and sing as much as I can. Of course, there is the classical stuff, but also the fun stuff. But when I do that, that really sort of refreshes my soul. And I've decided to not compromise on that. And that feels good. It's my me time, even if it's for 20 minutes, but I make time for it. I make certain that I make time for it.
It's so beautiful, Priya, because it's something that brings you joy. Okay. And I love what you're saying about make the time for myself, because it's crazy. You have to be so deliberate to actually take time out to care for ourselves, especially when we're in the helping professions, because we're so busy giving it to everybody else. And I love that it's something like singing, because it's something that is, it's so engaging of so many parts of your heart, your brain, your mind, your experience. Beautiful.
And the good thing is that I don't leave it only to me singing, but also listening to the music that I love. So basically I bring music into and I make it deliberate, wherein it's not in the background, but I'm in it. I'm with it in that moment. I'm with it. Yeah. Thank you.
So I love what you're saying is you're not saying it's about just having it there, but actually being mindful and being present with your singing, with your music. Priya, I'm just being funny here, but I'm very mindful of not singing, because I think then it would cause more trauma for everybody else.
So we have a couple of more people, Colleen, who want to share. There's Rajneesh, and then there's Meenakshi. So that's the order, folks.
Okay, Rajneesh.
Yes, thanks, Colleen. So I'll just keep it short. For me, self-compassion means not to become a very hard judge on yourself. So far in life, I 50 years done. I think I have been very harsh on myself, and for things that I missed doing, they come and haunt me big time. So I really thank you for bringing this up for all of us, for me, that self-compassion for ourselves and compassion for our clients is next to being empathetic. So I am also training myself, conditioning my mind to be empathetic to my own self, and also be not harsh as a very strong judge at that. So thank you.
I'd love to just comment on that, because one of the things, people are so hard on themselves. And it's, by the way, it's that narrative that comes from our culture, it comes from our childhood, it comes from the schooling system, that tells us that we have to be this and we mustn't be that. In fact, we're human beings with all our goodness and badness and frailties and strengths and everything. And Rajneesh, I always say to my clients, would you ever say that to your best friend? You idiot. Or you, there you go again. I say, would you ever? And they go, no. So I say, well, why would you say it to yourself? So we underestimate the importance of, and it's not just positive self-talk, I'm amazing, I'm good, it's actually just not speaking badly about ourselves the way we would about not speak badly about other human beings. Thanks, Rajneesh. Meenakshi?
Hello everyone. One important thing that I wanted to share about self-compassion is 2 little steps that I took for myself. Just like you, Colleen, I love saris, and I love to wear it for myself. And there's a tendency here for people when they see you in sari, particularly in the office setting, and they'll ask something special. Is it your child's birthday, or your husband's birthday, or something? There has to be something for you to wear sari. And I always find this, I always found it very weird. And I said, no, there's nothing special. I'm making it special because I love it. Okay. And I am wearing to please myself, right? Yeah. I feel good. I feel great. I feel positive. I feel wonderful. And I want to be that way. Right? So celebrate yourself and do that. So that was one. And the second thing was, I love flowers. And I don't want to wait for anyone to give me flowers. Why? I can gift it to myself, right? So the same thing. Every time I would have flowers in my office, let's say 1 day a week, then people would ask me, oh, something special? Did someone give you flowers? And, who has sent it? I'm like, why? Why do you need someone to send it, right? I have gifted it to myself because I love myself. I love flowers, and I want to appreciate that, right? So I thought it was not just to practice something for myself. What I was also trying to do is provide that little nugget of education to everyone around me that, hey, you can do this. You can practice this for yourself. So I just thought I would share that. Thank you.
Beautiful. You role modeling it for other people. You using aesthetic beauty to bring joy to your soul, and you honoring self. And that is something, like say, for example, any of my clients, they've got goals around, they say, I'm very good at work, but I'm not so good at my fitness, or I'm very good at that. People don't honor themselves. And I think those are small ways that you just almost teaching yourself that you are important. Really, really beautiful. So thank you for those suggestions as well there. I see in lots of Tashima comments about.
Yeah, Colleen, there are lots of lovely comments which you may want to you want us to read out some which are there, which people have put
Well,
down.
I think we'll come to the end and then we'll open up as well for more comments. But what I can see about just not being hard on ourselves. I mean, Pradeep's also commenting on that shadow personality. You know what? We're human beings. We're all, we're not perfect. We walk around this world as though we must never get angry. We shouldn't be jealous. We shouldn't hate. We do. We have those experiences because that's part of our human nature. And it's being kind to ourselves about that and choosing how we show up in the world. So I think there's a beautiful theme there. Thank you very much, everybody. Sure. Not feeling guilty about being a working mom. Yes, that guilt and guilt and shame and spirituality is so important. Okay, so let me go. I'll tell you about so if you remember, I said there's the beginning, there's the middle. And when I was creating this, I thought I better not put the end because kind of the last time I said, okay, this is what my life has been up until this point. It was at my 50th birthday and I gave a speech and I said, so I've learned all these things and now I've arrived, as if it was the end. Unfortunately, there was another 5 years to go. So it wasn't quite the end. So I talked about the present. Okay, so the Muddy story that kind of emerged from there. Unfortunately, and very sadly for me, very difficult for me, I got divorced. So Gabriel was quite young, Abigail was still at school, and kind of actually ended a marriage that should have actually ended a long time before. My dad had brain cancer. I moved him in with me and nursed him through the end of his life, and then got divorced shortly thereafter. So it was quite a traumatic time. I also lost my home, I lost my wealth, and I kind of was out in the world, just me and my kids, kind of out there together on our own. And that was, I had just discovered coaching. I just started to do the traveling. I'd started to study for my master's degree with my Warrior to Warrior, which had emerged from my TED talk. And I just said that no matter what, I was actually going to make this life work. And basically for my kids, I mean, it's good to have them as a sort of center. In fact, I'm just thinking about it now, but I made a commitment when I went out on my own. I said 2 promises I'm going to make. One is that I'm going to give Abigail the wedding of her dreams, which I did in December. And the other was that I was going to make sure that Gabriel was cared for the whole of the rest of his life. And that's all I've done, is put all of my effort into rebuilding my financial security, and everything I go to is towards creating if anything ever happens to me, that Gabriel should be safe. So there was the 3 of us. I found a home. We moved into a small home, which I paid off as quickly as I could. I rode my bike for all I was worth. I traveled to India. I worked hard. I never stopped learning. I never stopped studying. And I had this 50th birthday. I gave my speech at my 50th birthday about how now I've made everything happen and now everything was going to be okay. I was alone and I was incredibly lonely. For 7 years, I was on my own. It was really, really hard for me. I really love being part of a relationship. I mourned for my marriage. I cried for 3 years when I got divorced, which was also part of me learning to accept emotions. Oh, okay, it was okay. People kept saying to me, take medication, go on antidepressants. And I kept saying, why? I'm just sad. It's good that I'm sad about my divorce. It would be sad if I wasn't sad. So there I am, 50th birthday. I ran a marathon in the morning of my 50th birthday. I give this speech. I'm feeling excited. The rest of my life is ahead of me. And 1 week later, I'm in a cycling race and the guy in front of me hits a pothole. I go flying over my handlebars over him and I land head first onto the tar. it was a really bad accident. This is me quite a few hours after the accident. I shattered my wrist, this one here, not this one. I shattered my wrist in many different places. In fact, they had to completely rebuild my wrist, even using donor bone. Can you believe it? My face was broken. I've got metal plates here in my head. I've got metal plates here in my head. I mean, in my face. And it took me quite a long time to recover physically. However, okay, I'm sitting there. So in my cycling club where I'd been cycling, there'd been this guy that I'd noticed and I quite fancied. Now, remember, I've been on my own for 7 years. So I quite fancied him. But, you know, I was there, I was doing everything. I was successful. I was traveling overseas. I was building my business. I was buying a house. I was bringing up my children. But I really kind of fancied this man. And the night of my accident, the day of my accident, he heard about this, my accident, and something clicked in his brain. And he said, I've got to be next to her. And he got in his car and he drove to the hospital. And he arrived in the emergency room. You must hear him tell the story. He actually gets tears in his eyes. It's quite funny. He arrives in the emergency room. I remember my parents going, who's this? You know, like they didn't even know who he was. There I am still, I quite fancied him. So I'm kind of trying to impress him. I've got this broken face, this broken wrist, blood all over me. Anyway, Graham kind of never left my side. And I think that was kind of maybe the biggest lesson. And I'm not saying that the lessons are over, because I've learned on my 50th birthday, I said that, and things happened since then. But I think the biggest lesson that I got from this experience was, yes, work hard, be the warrior, keep learning, keep growing, but there's more lessons that I have to learn. One of them was a really important lesson for me, and that was about emerging into my master coach certification. Now, I don't know if any of you have done or are on the journey of going to master coaching, but it's a really different kind of coaching. And by the way, I did fail the first time, which was a good lesson, because then I realized how little I really knew about master coaching. And master coaching it's a different kind of coaching. It is about really sitting present with a person, allowing that person to reveal themselves to themselves. I was used to kind of being the guide, being the tough one, helping people become warriors. And I think master coaching helped me learn to sit in a more vulnerable space with my clients, while still being the catalyst for their shift, and being the sacred space for them to explore themselves in all their untidiness and messiness and vulnerability. I also did my PhD at that time. My new partner, Graham, put up with this, all my studying, and I did my PhD on mindfulness. So mindfulness was a big experience for me, learning about how to be present as opposed to how to fight. You know, up until this point, I've been fighting and kind of almost at war with life itself. And I think this is one of the best lessons that I learned, is I learned how to have support. So this is Graham and I dancing at my daughter's wedding in December. And we got married a year ago as well. And I'm really learning. But you know what I realized when I was preparing this talk, or right at the end of preparing this talk, because Tashimi, you asked me to do it a while ago. And right at the end of preparing the talk, I'm suddenly going, okay, now I'm talking about how I've learned it's the more gentle space of the lotus. It's the more beautiful space. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't always have to be difficult. I don't always have to be fat. I can also be vulnerable. I can depend on other people. I don't always have to be the warrior. And then guess what happened a week ago? I'm on the chair, because now we're about to move house. Graham and I are moving into a new house of our own. And I'm on a chair, moving everything myself. And guess what? I fall off the chair, break my collarbone, and now I'm really going to have to depend on everybody else to move house. But this life, I've had enough lessons. I promise you, I'll be vulnerable, and I'll get some help from now on. So we've got a last breakaway for you, and thank you for your beautiful comments. I really appreciate them. So before I teach you my last little space that I'd like to share with you, I'd like to get you to talk to each other. So Nimesh, we're going to go into another breakaway. And this time in this breakaway, I want you to share what is a beautiful gem, what is a lotus, what is that seed become through one of your learning experiences? What is one of the strengths or one of the wisdoms part of the enlightenment that you've achieved through your learning experience. So Nimesh, I think we'll just make it 10 minutes if that's okay.
Yes, we're ready. And participants, please note, this is going to be only for 10 minutes. You would have received your invitations. Kindly accept and move to your respective. Colleen, everybody's back.
Okay. So welcome back, everyone. We're going to have an opening for Q&A, but I just wanted to share one or two last slides. So we're going to have a chance to share straight after this. So the lesson that's kind of I centered on here in terms of what was the lotus that came from this experience of learning to be vulnerable, learning to be in a quieter space, learning to open up, to being supported, was mindfulness. So my business is called BrainWise. And what I really mean by BrainWise, it's about understanding the science of the brain, but connecting it to the heart and being brain wise, in fact, doing something. So it's the head, hands, and heart kind of approach. And my PhD was all about neuroscience and mindfulness. And I know it's kind of a hot topic of the moment, but I really have experienced that the power of mindfulness in my own life and in my coaching, and how the language I use to coach my clients. So a sort of a general definition of mindfulness. And by the way, I'll send this. This is my model, one of my models that I created for my PhD thesis, where I brought together Eastern and Western conceptualizations of mindfulness. Tashima, I'll send this to you afterwards, and you can give it as a handout, or if you like. So we understand mindfulness to be awareness of the present moment without judgment or interpretation. Okay, so we understand. And there's lots of different words for it, but if that we take that as the essence, it's about being in the present. It's very much centered in our core competencies of presence, of how we are present with our clients. So we're in the present moment, but this is also about how we're present with ourselves. How are we aware of our own present moments? Most of us are living on automatic. I call it living in a narrative. Most of us are in the story in our head constantly, where we're thinking we should do this, we must do that. Why did we do this? What if this happens? We live in fear, we live in anxiety, we live in regret. We're thinking about the past and the future all the time. And my thesis was about the neuroscience behind how we can be present in the present moment, and then also some techniques that we can bring into our coaching to help ourselves and our clients be present. So for me, the basis, or the foundation, or the if you going to gym to go and exercise a muscle, the gym that you go to exercise mindfulness in your brain is through meditation. Because when you are meditating, when you are bringing your attention to moment experiences, and that's whether you're in silent meditation, whether you're doing body scan, whether you are in compassion meditation, metta, doing the metta prayer, whether you're walking in nature, seeing, observing and appreciating, whether you're tasting your food, whether you're looking into your child's eyes, whether you're present with your clients, if you are exercising that part of your brain through meditation, then you are growing that part of your brain, okay? So meditation for me is one part of mindfulness. It's the foundation. It's how I teach myself and grow the attention present neural networks in my brain so that I can stay focused and present when I need to. The second, which is so that's more sort of based in ancient spiritual traditions, particularly Eastern traditions of mindfulness. The intentionality part of it is more of a Western interpretation, where this is how we deliberate and intentional about how we are being in our lives. When I walk into a session with my clients, I always set the intentions for how I want to be. I want to be really curious and open to what their experience is. I want to be present to what is possible for this client. I want to be present to their wisdom and to the language that they're using that may be limiting or maybe liberating for themselves. Okay, I'm very intentional about how I go into my sessions. I'm mindful of what it is that I'm doing. And this goes to the rest of your life. Most of us walk into a meeting on automatic. We just experience the meeting. But can you imagine the difference when you're intentional about how you're going to be present? And then the highest level for me of mindfulness, I call consciousness. These are just my words that I use to articulate these different concepts. And this is about living in the present moment without attachment to an ego identity. This is one of the most powerful ways that I have to talk to my clients, to empower them when they are in difficult circumstances. So let me explain what I mean by this. Most of us are trapped in an identity, a condition, you've heard me use that word a lot today, a conditioned identity of who or what we're supposed to be in the world. And that is basically, that it's that narrative that almost completely limits us from what is possible. So when we say I'm good or bad, when we say I'm female or male, when we say I'm right or wrong, all of those are just ego identities. It's just a story that we tell about ourselves. And I'll often say to my clients things like, if you step out of an identity and you just sit in the pure spirit of what you're experiencing, what is it that you need to see? When you're not defending your ego, when you're not, they don't like the word ego, so be careful of that. When you're not defending who you are supposed to be or what people are seeing, what is the truth here? And this has been the most amazing skill in order to empower people to not be trapped by the story that they've been told of who they're supposed to be or what's possible or what's not possible, or the story that they've taken on themselves. Because usually we take on the story of our childhood and our adolescence and our growing up and our culture. We take that story on to be the truth in our adult lives. So helping our clients become truly conscious to what is possible, I believe, is our magic wand that we have as coaches. When I'm sitting present with the client, my clients know nothing about the story that I've told you today. I have got clients that have been with me for 10 or 15 years that know absolutely nothing about my life, unless maybe they've Googled me and seen my TED Talk, but they do not know the depth of the stories that I've told you today, because it's not about me. I am there completely present and mindful about their spirit, their wisdom, their brilliance. So I think that is the message that I have for you today is be present, be mindful, be conscious, do the work yourselves in order to grow that part of yourself so that you can be that catalyst for other people's transformation. And as you've probably heard, one of my favorites the gurus is Thich Nhat Hanh. He said, it's like growing lotus flowers. You cannot grow lotus flowers on marble. You have to grow them in the mud. Without mud, you can't have lotus flowers. Without suffering, you have no way to learn how to be understanding and compassionate. Go forth and explore your mud, explore your vulnerability, and be the lotus that seed is wanting to be. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Colleen. I almost didn't want to break that very, very powerful silence that followed what you just said. But in the interest of time, as we continue with any further questions, comments, and reflections, I'm going to request Nimesh to just quickly put up the feedback poll and request all of you to give us your responses on that. And once we're done with the poll, I'm going to post the CCU claim form also.
And I think we're going to open up for some Q&A.
Yes, let's open up for Q&A. So if you want to post your question in the chat box, feel free to do so. If you want to unmute yourself and ask a question now, feel free to do so. You want to raise your questions as you are starting to think about the questions, you could do that as well.
Yeah, may I go for a question, please? Hello?
Yes. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Colleen, first of all, a lot of respect for you for all the experiences and all the traumas that you've been through and pushed through it. Now, as a coach, our own experiences being in the background and as an intention of giving the strength to my coachee, to my client. how do I go about that?
So Ajit, it is Ajit, isn't it, that's speaking?
Ajit, yeah.
Ajit, I'm going to share what is an opinion. It's not a rule, okay? In my, a lot of my coaches say to me, but Colleen, surely I'm showing empathy, surely I'm showing caring and support if I share my own life experiences. I personally don't believe that it's a story. I walk the walk, I believe. I walk the walk. I have confidence and I have certainty in myself as a coach, and that's what my clients are looking for. They're not looking for me to say, I've also been through a divorce, or I've also lost somebody I love, or because then that, for me, it takes away from this being their unique experience. And because remember, no two brains are alike. Everybody's experience is completely their own experience. As a therapist in therapy, you do not share anything about your personal life. I bring that belief into my coaching. However, it is my belief. I don't say that it's not right for everybody. Some people find it useful to share experiences. For me, it's my client's space, and it's my client's space alone. And funnily enough, they don't ask me, which is quite interesting. If they say, we want your opinion, or have you been through this? I'll say, yeah, I'll share with you, but I want to know what you think. I want to know where you are. And find that when I do that, people want to be heard, and they want to share their own experience without somebody contaminating that with their experience. But Ajit, that's an opinion.
See your point. I get what you said. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Colleen.
Okay, anyone else with a question or comment, you can put it in the chat, or even for Tashima or Anuradha, if you've got anything you'd like to share. My usually talkative Indian audiences have gone quiet, Tashima.
Yes, people have gone into the reflective space.
Can I ask a question, Colleen?
Sure, go ahead.
Yes, Pradeep.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you for your vulnerability and your sharing. And I did get present to a lot of things myself. My question to you is, if you look back at your life and see all the situations where you've seen the muddy waters and emerged as a lotus, and when you try to connect the dots, what emerges in front of you?
So I think that, I mean, for me, I was really privileged actually to be nudged by Anuradha and Tashima to actually share my story today. I was saying it to them in the break, and that I don't think I've ever connected that I live my life, you know, and I do self-reflection, because I think that's especially part of our new competency, which is the coaching mindset, that we are supposed to engage in reflective practices. But I don't think I'd kind of developed them as dots as much. And I think maybe the experience that I was privileged enough to have to prepare this talk today, maybe it's something we should all go through, is to actually explore what is the chronological journey, whether it's chronological or experiential or whatever journey of our lives, and what are the lessons. So Pradeep, I've got a thing that I share with my clients, is I often say, and I think this arm here is going to be evidence of that. I say to my clients, you know, life is like walking through this beautiful beautiful field of grass. And we're walking through, and it's everything wonderful. And every now and again, we step on a rake, and a rake hits us on the head. And what do? We pick up the rake, and we look at it, and we deal with it, and we put it down. Okay. And then we carry on walking, and we step on the rake again, and it hits us in our head again. And obviously, I'm talking metaphorically here. And what is our job is to learn and grow from these experiences. So we need to pick up those rakes and look at them and say, what is the universe telling me? What is life showing me here that I need to learn? And in some ways, I feel like I've learned the lesson of vulnerability and sharing my life and depending on other people. But clearly I haven't, because I fell off the chair and broke my arm. So for me, it's about paying attention to these lessons instead of just walking through life unconscious. I certainly don't live a perfect life. I certainly have many failings and many difficulties. But I think it's my job as a coach to walk the walk and show my clients, or not that I'm telling them necessarily, but to know that I'm learning and growing from these difficult experiences. I hope that helps, Pradeep.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Colleen.
Thank you.
We do have a couple of questions in the chat box, Colleen. So Shubhra has asked, what drove you to bounce back each time?
Shubhra, You know, my brother didn't bounce back. My brother died. And I guess maybe that's the biggest lesson, because, you know, when I show you the graph, sorry, I haven't pre-thought this, so it's like coming out of my head as I think it. I showed you that graph, and at the bottom of the graph, I said, that's your opportunity to learn and grow. That's your opportunity to find courage. That's your opportunity to build character. But I also say sometimes people don't, and that's not my choice. My choice is not to decide whether you are going to learn and grow from this experience or not. My brother didn't learn and grow. My brother fell off. Okay, I don't think it was my brother's fault, but it was his life journey. I've consciously chosen through my difficult experiences to choose a life journey where I say, what is the wisdom I can find? What is the courage I need? What do I need to learn? And it's maybe that perception, maybe that perspective, I don't know, that enables me. I also think I am blessed with a fairly resilient personality, although I don't think it was there before I started the Muddy Swamp work. I was pretty pathetic when I was up until the age of 18. Thanks.
And there's another question. Sorry, I'm just getting to it.
From Preeti.
Okay, from Preeti, yes. Would you share something about bringing intuitiveness into the coaching space? I assume that being an empty vessel full of attention and intention allows something to emerge and needs playing with, even without being certain.
So Preeti, this was the topic that I asked Tashima and Anurad if I could talk about intuition, because I'm dying to, whenever I'm asked to do one of these talks, I do like intensive research, but I'm very strong proponent of intuition. I'd love to give more insight into the neuroscience behind it. But I think, you know, sorry, I'm going to go a little bit neuroscience-y now, but you know, your brain is not just this organ in your head. Your brain is your entire nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal cord. It's your autonomic nervous system. It's your organs. It's your body. It's your sensation. It's your perceptions. It's your emotions. Every part of you is part of, in my mind, your mind. Okay, and we need to be present to the entire, to all of us when we're with our clients, and to all of them. Like, you have got neurons in your gut. You have got connections, a vagus nerve that connects with your gut and your brain. You've got neurons in your heart. So I need to sit and be present, like you're using those words, attention and intentional, that I'm listening to everything that is happening, not just the words that my client is using, and I'm not just listening to it with my ears. I'm listening to it with my whole body, and I'm asking them, I'm saying, I'm curious, what's happening in your body right now? I'm curious about, I had a client yesterday who said to me, she's got 3 options of what she has to do in her career. She doesn't know what to do, and she wants to think it through. So I said to her, okay, I said, just before we think it through, let's just have a bit of fun. I took 3 packets of sugar from the table. There was a brown one, a white one, and a fake sugar, you know, those sweet, no, red one. And I said, okay, that one's your first option, the white one's your second option, and the red one's your third option. Without thinking, which one do you choose? She went and chose one. And I said, what does that say to you? She goes, that's my intuition. So you can play with it. You can have fun with it. I trust my client's intuition. And we didn't even really have to discuss it at the end of the session because she'd come up with her answer.
Colleen, if you may kind of permit me, so there's this one question which has been sitting with me for some time. When you talked about as coaches, so we have our own life journey and we have the life journey of our clients. And there at times is a very thin line between the compassion, empathy, and overwhelm. And at times we try and sit inside our clients' stories. What do you have to say about that? And what are your 2 bits of advice or inputs that you would like to share with us coaches?
Oh, I think, Anuradha, I think it is such a hard journey for us to learn as part of our growth journey, is because we have to learn, you know, if you go and study psychology and you go into supervision and you have these years of internship, you're taught how to separate yourself from the client's story. You're not taught that as coaches. You don't have that education. Maybe we should think of doing it. But I think I always use my graph, you know, that my roller coaster one, as somebody called it. The roller coaster graph is understanding that my job is just to be present and not to take it on. It's their journey. It's not my journey. And while I feel empathy, I don't walk away and take their pain home with me. But the grief counseling, trauma counseling, I've done addiction counseling. All of that has helped me learn to not attach to my client's pain. But Anuradha, I can't give you a simple answer. It is hard for us, and we have to be conscious of it, and we have to learn how to be compassionate, but not take it with us, because it doesn't belong to us. It belongs to them. Yeah, big question. I've got a couple of minutes more. I see Sunanda's got her hand up.
Yeah, and Suparna also posted a question/comment in the chat box.
Okay, so you want to go first?
So Sunanda, very quickly,
Yes.
we're running short of time.
Yes. So, Colleen, you just mentioned about resilience a little while ago. And I just wanted to understand that can resilience sometimes hold you back from being vulnerable? You're so used to getting up and moving on and bouncing back, or that's what you think you are all about, that you do not stop and accept your vulnerability and seek help.
Absolutely. Hence, life keeps showing me, Sunanda. Okay, but you know, I remember my dad saying to me once. He said, "Colleen, you're like a metal bar that has been founded in a furnace. You know, you're so strong." And I wore that with pride. I thought that was like, but in many ways it hasn't. It's because it didn't allow me to be vulnerable. And I don't think I've fully learned it. I think I am still learning to be. I mean, today's a lesson for me because I'm sharing my story very personally. And being very vulnerable. So I think it's a journey, and I agree with you. I think sometimes that resilience and that attachment to our resilience, maybe it's attachment rather, can actually get in the way. So thank you for highlighting that. And then I'll look at Suparna's.
Thank you so much. Yep.
Thank you. Suparna's comment of the using archetypes. So yeah, I mean, that's where I came up with the warrior. You know, it was it was a kind of archetypal work. I love Freud, I love Jung, I love shadow work, and the wounded soldier. I mean, I think archetypes are useful because it creates a language that we can use, and creating the warrior identity for me was useful because it enabled me to find strength and anchor myself in strength when I needed to, when my kids were vulnerable in that. My new archetype, by the way, is the hummingbird that I found. And the hummingbird flies backwards, which is, I didn't fly backwards when I fell off the chair, but the hummingbird, I keep that as my archetype with my clients. In other words, do things differently. Be a little bit away and observe. Be fast, be present. So I like archetype work. We could do a whole talk on that, Anuradha, at some stage.
Thank you, Dr. Colleen. Thanks.
I love that you've kind of opened up a couple of topics already. And I think looking at the love that everybody is showering on you, I think we'd love to have you back, Colleen.
Thank you. Thank you then. So I think let me go to the rest of my life.
Yes. Thank you. You've been extremely patient with us, and thanks. Over to you, Tushima.
Thank you. Thank you, Colleen. I think I can very truthfully say that we've had many, many sessions for our members and for our guests, and people have shared their insights, their experiences, their wisdom. And today we had you sharing your life with us, and that makes it so much more special. Thank you very, very much. It's just been fabulous, and everyone in the audience is showering their love on you. And it's so well deserved. Thanks very much.
I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Sorry, before everyone goes, I'd like to have the customary photograph. So if you can please have you all back on camera, please. I'd like to really savor this moment and capture this moment for us going forward. So I really request you to please come back on camera so that we can capture this beautiful presence that we have with Colleen today.